I know this obsession with thinness is unhealthy and anti-feminist, but that's what a fat girl would say.
We often hear that exposure to media, and particularly social media, can have serious negative effects on self-perception, body image, and general psychological well-being. It's not hard to see when you look at the heinous environment that is Twitter, with people constantly screeching at each other at the top of their lexical lungs. That social media might just not be a super great thing for human communication and psychological health in the long term. For example, fat activists who support the idea of body positivity are consistent in the opinion that social media and media in general causes problems with self-esteem in women, which can lead to depression and serious eating disorders. Some, namely Instagram therapist, gee, if that isn't a unique title, Sonali Washatwar, have recently suggested that there's only one cure to this problem, and that's the utter disassembly of Western civilization. Which is ironic coming from someone who looks like they probably couldn't effectively disassemble IKEA furniture. Social media has been quick to respond to these kinds of fears as well, as recently Lindsay Shepherd, who was reprimanded after playing a Jordan Peterson clip in her university, was recently also banned from Twitter for calling activist Jessica Yaniv fat after she mocked Shepherd for having a septate uterus, a common genetic deformity that often causes miscarriage. Yaniv did this repeatedly. Shepherd called her fat once. While Yaniv's situation is its own can of worms, considering that person is suing local estheticians for refusing to wax his male genitalia and has some very, let's just say, creepy doesn't do it justice, interactions with others online wherein he frequently requests information about feminine hygiene products and little girls and women's restrooms.
Yeah, all of those tweets, except for that middle one over there and the one on the right, are all fake.
I don't believe you.
Will is now trying to organize a no-adults-allowed, partially nude swim event. Yeah, let's just say Yaniv has some serious baggage, to say the least. But the point is that social media is super sensitive to the topic of body acceptance due to these kinds of claims of fat-shaming, which is why Yaniv remains on Twitter posting about little girls' restrooms, while Shepherd is banned for calling her fat. But doesn't that seem to be a little bit of a double standard for Lindsay Shepherd? While I was working on this video, Lindsay was actually unbanned from Twitter, but that only came after Jessica Yaniv got a ton of negative press attention over it. Yeah, and, you know, the other stuff. Social media outlets are really quick to shut down anything that might make someone feel uncomfortable about their weight. So I ask you, is there any merit to any of these claims? Does social media hurt us psychologically? And if so, under what circumstances? Does media exposure produce negative body image in people? And if so, does that relate to disordered eating habits and mental health issues? Today, let's look at the nuance and the data on the topic of body positivity, social media, and social capital. And we'll begin by looking at the basics, which is answering that simple question, is social media actually bad for our mental health? We often hear a lot of anecdotes about how social media makes people's lives worse. And again, a quick gander at the constant shitstorm that is Twitter should make that seem evident on its face. But we don't play no common sense games here, friends. No, we go deep into the depths of data. So does social media use make us feel worse about ourselves? Before I provide some answers to that question, since we're on the topic of social media, this is a good time to tell you about this video's sponsor, NordVPN. In the opening of the video, I did make it a bit obvious that access to a free internet is becoming increasingly scarce. And one way that you can maintain that access is through a virtual private network or VPN. And Nord is my personal choice in staying safe, secure, and anonymous online. With Nord, you can connect privately to over 5,200 servers across 62 countries and counting. It even works in China, and because they don't log any of your data, you can be confident that your browsing, search, and posting histories are kept secure. In countries like the UK, where misgendering someone on Twitter is now cause for arrest, Nord gives you the ability to reclaim your right to free speech online. If you click the link in my description, you'll get 75% off a 3-year plan with Nord. That's just under $3 a month. And if you don't like it, no problem, because it comes with a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. So in the words of a true gentleman, scholar, and one of the most poignant philosophers of our age,
Try it out, man.
I've been using Nord for about a year because of its super fast servers and because I can take it with me on my phone, my laptop, as well as my PC. There's a reason Nord is consistently rated the best VPN by leading tech sources like VPN Mentor. So try it out, man, try it out. And with that in mind, let's talk about just how all this social media stuff affects the mind. There's a buttload of research on this topic, to put it eloquently, which makes it kind of difficult to determine where to start, but let's begin with Lee Woodall 2016, who found that positive and negative emotions expressed by Facebook users was directly related to the status of the shared group members who made a specific post. That is, people who are more similar to us, rather than those who are more dissimilar to us in terms of social distance, are the ones most likely to affect our emotions online. Specifically, people felt happier when they saw a post from a close friend that presented that friend in a positive light, and more negative emotions when they saw a friend being dragged through the mud publicly for making a fool of themselves on social media.
There is no formula for people!
That's the general idea, baby.
This experiment, interestingly, also found that those who tended to have lowered self-esteem were unlikely to engage in more comparisons, and thus were mostly unaffected by the increase in emotions felt by those in higher self-esteem conditions. The takeaway from that is that emotional responses are based on the comparative higher or lower status of our shared social groups of friends, but also that those most dramatically affected by our friend groups are those who have high self-esteem. People with low self-esteem instead tended to just have more negative emotions in general regarding social media use, and as such were less affected by who tended to post what. But there's a little bit of conflicting evidence on that, and where it gets more ominous is that there is evidence as well that social media is used by people who tend to have a lot of existing lowered self-esteem, as seen in Vogel et al. 2014, who found that increased use of Facebook was related to lower self-esteem, as well as making more social comparisons to others, that is relating the self in contrast to other people, both upwards, in that the other person is somehow better than me, which often results in envy, and downwards, feeling a sense of superiority over the other person because I'm just better than them. So does social media use cause lowered self-esteem? Keep in mind, this is just a correlation. It doesn't indicate that social media use causes this, but may instead actually attract people who already aren't the biggest fans of themselves. In a second study, participants saw posts that depicted healthy and pro-social behaviors, such as running and hiking, preparing some avocado toast and activated almonds, or behaviors that the researchers deemed unhealthy, such as getting a speedrunning record. Okay, that's kind of cool. Doing volunteer work by reading for children. Okay, that might terrify me a little bit actually. And relaxing on the beach? What? Okay, wait a minute. Let me be clear about the author's definitions of healthy and unhealthy behaviors here, because at least for me, I think it's much healthier to relax on the beach while playing video games than building houses for the poor, which was seen as healthy, or reading books to children, which was depicted as unhealthy. Wait a minute here. What are you trying to imply, Vogel? Are you saying there's something unhealthy about this? What a bigot.
I'm tired of it right now. I can't handle it more.
People who saw the healthy post viewed themselves less positively than the other person who had made the post, perhaps because they envy them. In contrast, the unhealthy, which I'm going to put in some quotation marks and I'm really just going to say is normal posts about playing some vidya, left participants feeling more positive about themselves and similarly positive to the person who posted it. A similar effect was present when participants saw a post with a lot of interaction, a lot of likes. They felt worse about themselves and better about the recipient of those tasty thumbs up. In other words, they tended to feel envious, at least when seeing people doing positive things on the internet. Still, this is all just correlation, so what about causation? Does using social media negatively affect the psyche, causally? Verdun et al. 2015 examined the effects of active and passive social media posting on Facebook, and found that those who had just browsed around were actually pretty bummed out at the end of the day, but it had no effect on their overall life satisfaction. A second study, however, sent text messages to participants for about a week and asked them to report their feelings about their social media usage over that time, which provides us with some causal data. They found that depressive symptoms increased over a single week when they accounted for social media use, particularly passive use. That is, simply reading information about others, browsing their feed, looking through social media stuff rather than posting your own and interacting. And it actually gets worse too. In an experiment from Steitz, Wickham, and Acetali 2014, they found that any and all time spent on Facebook, be it using upward, neutral, or downward social comparisons to others, were all related to more depressive symptoms. That is, any and all social media use, when it involved social comparison with others, was related to an increase in reports of depression.
So I'm not your friend then?
Dad, you are my friend.
But you just don't want to add me as a friend?
Dad, it's just a stupid click of a button that takes 2 seconds.
Right, but you don't have the 2 seconds, or...
Further, Tandok, Ferrucci, and Duffy 2015 found specifically that Facebook use alone was not related to higher reports of depressive feelings, but was mediated through feelings of envy towards others online. Specifically, they found that surveillance behavior, that's just looking at people's feeds and postings, was negatively related to depression directly, but in contrast, was positively related to greater expression of envy, which was related to depression. It seems then that this surveillance behavior, it builds up over time, as more and more personal information regarding others is consumed and results in greater envy of those others. But the problem here is that we know nobody on social media is being completely themselves. They're putting their best face forward, right? So everyone is constantly being envious of each other. Further, Apple 2015 indicated that those who were depressed already beforehand, which we know people with low self-esteem do tend towards depression, when they use social media, are happier when they view profiles of attractive people, while non-depressed people tended to actually feel unhappy when they saw photos of unattractive people on social media, and were generally happy just looking at pictures of the pretty folk. So it's not just appearance. In fact, looking at pretty people can make depressed people online feel better, at least temporarily. Again, the problem is in how this compounds and builds upon itself. Because in this study, depressed people were much more likely to express feelings of envy towards others who were seen as attractive in comparison to non-depressed people. They had much less envy in general towards others. And if you haven't noticed yet, there seems to be a bit of a pattern appearing here in that people who are already depressed or already have low self-esteem are the ones who are going to be most likely to have negative outcomes via social media exposure. Further, Cho and Edge, assessed how using Facebook affects the perceptions that others around them are generally happier, had better lives than themselves, or believed that the world was a fair place. They found that the number of years spent using Facebook and spending more hours a day on the website was related to increased perceptions that others were generally happier than ourselves, while having more friends on Facebook that one did not personally know led to people being more likely to believe others had a better life. In contrast, spending more time with real-life friends decreased perceptions that others were happier or better off online. In other words, it seems you can kind of mitigate these negative effects by having real-life friends. Spend some time offline if it's starting to get to you. Finally, this study found that more religious people were similarly less likely to think that they have drawn the short end of the lifestyle stick. However, I do need to note that that failed to reach statistical significance. What they did find is that religious people were more likely to think that the world is a fair place, as do those with more friends in general. None of this is super surprising, but again, we find that traits, things that are inherent to a person, can tend to be influential when it comes to social media use effects. And similarly, that if you are being negatively affected by social media, turn it off and go hang out with your friends.
From now on, I'm gonna try to become a better, kinder, more generous person.
Hey, can I use your credit card? You know what? Yes, you can. Cool. It's for porn. I already used it.
Lang and Crucis 2015 conducted several studies on the relationship between pride, envy, and different types of envy, be it benevolent or malicious, in social media. First, let me describe what is benevolent and malicious envy. Sometimes we can envy a person and we want to be like them. That's benevolent. While other times, we instead may want to replace the object of our envy, to dethrone them. That's malicious. That's wanting to take somebody down, to cancel them. I don't have the data, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that all of cancel culture is a product of malicious envy. Who gets canceled? People with a lot of power, people with a lot of influence, people with a lot of social capital, a lot of friends and a lot of followers online. But I digress. Across a series of studies, and there's a lot of them, so I'm gonna pick and choose. In one of these studies, participants saw a video of a person who had supposedly just received top scores in a class and either reacted with embarrassment, authentic pride, indicated by a fist bump and a smile, or hubristic pride, wherein the actor acted like a smug little prick. The researchers found that authentic pride produced more benign envy, benevolent envy. People tended to like those who were righteously prideful and wished to gain power over those who expressed hubris. They really didn't like the smug little prick.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
They also found that participants in an additional study tended to mirror the types of behaviors of pride that they saw others enact, either hubristic or authentic. This more malicious envy that's induced by hubris and narcissism was examined in social media specifically by Choi et al. 2015, and found that Facebook users were less likely to like and comment on stuck-up bitchy posts than those low in narcissism. For this purpose, being overly narcissistic is probably not the best way to go if you're trying to maximize your social media influence. No, the best way is to encourage benign or benevolent envy. This is why people hate Jake and Logan Paul. They're narcissistic. People don't want to aspire to be the Paul brothers. They want to overthrow the Paul brothers and take their place.
He admits that he is a liar. Son of a bitch!
Looks like he's shopping for a silk sash at Tootie's on South Street.
A silk sash at Tootie's? What an asshole.
Similar results can be seen in Lin and Utz 2015, who found an increase in benevolent envy when posts came from closer personal friends, when they saw that post indicated someone on their timeline had just been on vacation or had gotten a new iPhone. Malicious envy was only related to those who reported being generally more envious as a person, a trait. What this all means is that people who are not overly narcissistic and are instead friendly, at least online, are more likely to induce benign envy in others, which promotes self-improvement, rather than malicious envy, which promotes antisocial feelings towards the poster. Yet benign envy is not necessarily so benign, as illustrated by Nexi and Prince in 2015, who found that both men and women, but particularly in the fairer of the sex, the more people use social media to ask for feedback and to make social comparisons, which does encourage benign envy as well as malicious envy, the more depressive symptoms they tend to exhibit after a year of social media use. That is, people who make a lot of these social comparisons, even benign ones, feel worse about the self. This was particularly powerful as well in people who were less popular and also engaged in excessive social comparison with others online, to the degree that they were nearly twice as likely to have symptoms of depression than those who rarely or never compared themselves to others. Self-comparison, therefore, seems to be the operative variable, along with traits, not media exposure itself. An experiment of social comparison's power over social media perceptions of others using Instagram posts from DeVries et al. 2017 had participants post a selfie and then look at a few posts from other supposed participants that were either positive or negative, posting happy messages or frankly annoyed ones. Alone, they found no relationship between seeing a positive or negative message attached to a selfie, but when they controlled for social comparison, woo lad, did a trend start to form. Specifically, people who tended to engage in more social comparisons felt worse after they saw a positive post rather than a negative one, while those who engage in little social comparison felt more positively after seeing positive posts. It seems consistent to me then that people who tend to compare themselves a lot to others are far more susceptible to the potential negative and deleterious effects that social media can produce. Why then do we continue to use social media if it makes us feel so shitty? Well, it's likely because it's addictive, and particularly if you're a passive viewer of this information and you're engaging in a lot of social comparison, I can see how that could become extremely psychologically addicting. But I don't have to guess because there's data on it, because there always is. Lim and Yang 2015 looked at the effects of social comparison on feelings of envy and shame online and the likelihood that participants would become burned out on social media or intend to switch to a different service. As expected, social comparison led to more envy and more shame, but envy itself was not associated with feelings of burnout. It didn't make people want to leave the platform. It didn't make people want to quit social media. And envy was only slightly related to intentions to switch to a different social media platform. In fact, the whole model only accounted for 6% of variance in intention to switch.
The premise of the game is you take one finger, put it in your mouth, the other one goes up your when he says go, you switch.
Instead, social comparisons and shame predicted 47% of variance in reported social media burnout, but envy was not a part of that. Shame and social comparison. So the interesting takeaway from that is that feeling envious, despite all of the potential negative effects that we've seen it can have, does not cause social media burnout. It doesn't make people leave. But is social media fundamentally different than face-to-face communication? It does seem so. There's evidence that social media is particularly powerful when it comes to inducing feelings of envy and subsequent dissatisfaction with the life compared to offline interaction. Specifically when it comes to the types of envy-inducing behavior that we commonly see on social media with people posting about how great and wonderful their life is. Krasinova et al. 2013 found that envy was by far the most frequently reported frustration that users had with Facebook, followed by wanting senpai to notice them. They wanted more followers, they wanted more attention. The researchers asked participants to rate how envious they had felt after a recent encounter, either offline or on Facebook. And while envy was more commonly reported offline in cases of money, success, and actually physical appearance, online, reports of envy regarding leisure and vacations were almost 3 times as common as offline envy. And envy regarding social interactions, being friends, was over twice as likely to be reported on Facebook than in person. Similar to other models we've looked at, passively following people on Facebook led to decreased life satisfaction both directly and as mediated through envy. Overall, browsing other people's posts can cause a lot of envy. And ultimately, the 2 factors in this explain over 15% of variance in life satisfaction overall. And when you think about how many things go into your life satisfaction, being envious on social media accounts for 15% of variance in whether or not you are satisfied with your life. What we should get out of all of this is that people who are already depressed, who already have low self-esteem, and who engage in a lot of social comparison online, who feel a lot of envy, are the ones most likely to be affected by social media interaction and engagement, at least negatively. So to answer the question I started this segment with, does social media negatively affect mental health? The answer is yes and no. It's based on the individual. So if you're the kind of person who finds yourself feeling envious online, making a lot of upward and downward social comparisons to other people, and doing a lot of passive surveillance type interaction rather than direct interaction, it's probably time for you to stop. At least get away for a little bit.
Blues Traveler's your favorite band, right?
Wait, how did you know?
I just stalked every single person in your graduating class, scoured all their individual Facebook photos until I found one from 1994 that you could be seen in the background of, sporting a nasty little rat tail and a Blues Traveler t-shirt.
However, so far we haven't talked a whole lot about attractiveness and people's body types online. We haven't talked about physical appearance. So the question is there a negative effect on mental health of viewing images of attractive people, particularly thin people? If we were to believe the fat activists and the body positive promoters, this is a really serious issue that causes major mental health and disordered eating problems within the population. But is it true? How does media actually affect this? A meta-analysis of research on media exposure to thin and attractive people from Lopez Guimera et al. 2010 illustrates that historically, the majority of research on body image and media exposure has been concerned with women and girls, not so much with men.
Goodness, girl, you huge.
Who's your friend? Or is that your butt?
Girl, you as quick as you are after.
Consistently, longitudinal data have not been, well, consistent, though, in this area. A review of existing meta-analyses examined in this study, however, paints a fairly clear picture that girls exposed to media understand that there is a thin ideal, and that there is a pressure to maintain a thin weight. But this is not just because there's an ideal out of beauty. It is true that obesity is related to a lot of negative health outcomes, some of which can be fatal. And despite the relatively large effect of more girls holding a thin ideal or feeling pressured to be thin, the effects on reported body dissatisfaction and internalization of this thin ideal and changes in eating behaviors are usually pretty small. And based on the meta, some women, usually those with personality variables that already exist, such as low self-esteem, tend to be more negatively affected by exposure to media. However, even this is not consistent, as some meta-analyses have found no effect on body image after media exposure. Generally, most of these studies tend to find small effects on behavior after media exposure, or none at all. And I could go through all of these meta-analyses independently, but it would just take too much time.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
And there are some worrying findings within here, as various studies have found that seeing thin, attractive women on television or in different types of media, when women express a desire openly to look more like the women they see in media, they do tend to be more prone to change their dieting and eating habits, or even develop an eating disorder. But there's something to pay attention to there. It's only when women said that they wanted to model the people they were seeing on TV or in magazines or on the radio. And some of these findings have been a little bit more thick boys than others. So let's take a look at the buffet of data we have laid at our disposal to find some answers to the oft-assumed conclusion that many are quick to jump to, although perhaps not physically, because they can't.
You want your belt to buckle, not your chair.
The conclusion that media consumption causes low self-esteem, and not just donut consumption. A study from Vandenberg et al. 2017 followed adolescent weight control behaviors in association with frequency of reading magazines that featured weight loss articles and advertisements of thin women, and found that over 5 years, girls who had hardly ever or sometimes read these magazines were between 1.2 and 2 times as likely to engage in healthy weight control behaviors, practicing a normal diet than those who were not readers. So, hey, positive effect. But here's the bad side. Girls who often read these magazines were more than 3 times as likely to develop extreme weight control behaviors than the control group who didn't read the magazines, and more than twice as likely to have reported binge eating. No such effect was found in boys, and interestingly, the researchers found no effect on magazine reading and body satisfaction, self-esteem, and depressive symptoms in all of these girls. They developed disordered eating at a higher rate, but they didn't report lowered body satisfaction, self-esteem, or depression. How could that be? Aren't these things all supposed to be related? Well, not necessarily. It is possible that the girls were already beginning to engage in these behaviors and these deleterious dieting habits. This is the problem of correlation not representing a causal link in a direction. Thus, even a study lasting 5 years, a longitudinal study, outside of an experiment, even studies like this one are merely reporting correlates. Strong and disturbing correlates, but correlates regardless. So we need to look at more data. You know, get some more answers. Not just because I want to look at more numbers or anything.
Numbers, numbers, numbers!
In an interesting contrast to the findings of Vandenberg and pals, which showed no relationship between magazine reading and self-esteem or body image, Don't and Tigeman in 2006 followed girls, not like that you pervert, and asked them about their media exposure over the course of a year, and found that over that time, appearance-focused television programs were negatively related to satisfaction with one's own appearance. But we can't stop with just that knowledge alone. The researchers use a hierarchical regression, a technique that allows them to determine the degree a single variable affects others in the mix by entering these variables into a series of steps, in this case 2 steps. When the first step added was a desire for thinness, that is, girls already before the study began had a desire to lose weight, that desire was correlated with lower self-esteem and less satisfaction with one's own appearance. It was also true when looking at BMI. Girls who were heavier when the study began had a greater desire to be thin over time than girls of a lower BMI. Additionally, girls were heavily influenced, pun intended, by their friend groups, as girls who believed their social group had a desire to have thinner bodies similarly wanted to lose more weight themselves and reported lower self-esteem and bodily dissatisfaction over a year. Personal friend groups. So let's be clear about what this means. The effect of media exposure on appearance satisfaction is present here, but peer effects overwhelmingly seemed to be more important at predicting which girls would be likely to overwhelmingly be affected by media exposure. Again, media is just one tiny fraction of this. It's everything else that seems to be more important. If you have a friend who wants to be thin and you are heavy, that matters far more in terms of personal dissatisfaction with the body and desires for thinness than media exposure alone ever could. However, I should note, in direct contrast, Presnell, Bierman, and Stice 2004 found that increased pressure to be thin from media was negligible in predicting body satisfaction. But even more interestingly, that social groups, including friends and family, also pretty negligible at determining whether or not someone felt bad about their body. Instead, gender, starting BMI, and feeling negatively just about everything in life in general, being depressive, were stronger predictors even than peer pressure. This is a particularly odd finding, as Christakis and Fowler 2007 find that obesity tends to spread across social networks, indicating that if our friends are overweight, we might tend to be overweight as well. But taken in tandem with the findings of Presnell and friends, this means that the spread is not necessarily due to social pressure to be thin or to be fat necessarily, but rather that our social networks are strong predictors of our own BMI, likely because it creates a perception of normalcy. What is normal anyway, if it's not what's normal to those closest to us?
Is there even such thing as normal? Yes, there is. See the way I'm talking to you right now, with my dick in my pants? That is normal.
But we'll get back to social networks soon. First, we need to keep trying to parse out whether or not media is really the supposedly problematic variable it's often portrayed as by fat activists and social justice types as much as it is by actual medical professionals at this point. Because I'm not convinced that it is. And I'm not convinced because I've looked at the data. And based on what we've looked at so far, you should be probably unconvinced as well. But to get a better idea, we can look at findings from Field et al. 1999, who looked at both media and peer influence on adolescent and pre-adolescent girls, and found that the strongest predictor of developing bulimic behavior, specifically purging, was neither media nor peers alone, although both did play a role, but rather that the biggest factor was a girl's desire to model and look more like women they saw on TV or magazines over a period of a year. Again, it was a desire. It was an active desire to want to be more like other people. Exposure itself is not the problem. A more recent study from the same cohort found nearly identical results in that modeling the appearance of people seen in the media, not media exposure alone, nor peer exposure alone, was a strong predictor of developing an eating disorder, along with starting weight, concerns about one's weight, and gender, being female in this case, all being particularly more important at determining who develops an eating disorder. But again, the biggest variable was wanting to emulate others. That was the big kicker. It was social comparison.
Yeah, what do you think? He looks like a f***ing loser.
Hey, at least I'm housebroken.
The authors then suggest that the typical belief of fat activists that media causes negative body image is completely inaccurate, and that instead, girls who already possess concerns about their weight are more likely to seek out media that depicts their ideal body and reinforces these pre-existing beliefs. And these girls might also engage in modeling behaviors, but that's an individual trait. That's an individual characteristic. Media exposure alone is not responsible for this. Specifically, this can be noted in their research as girls under the age of 14 whose mothers had an eating disorder were significantly more predisposed to developing one as well. It's not media, it's socialization, and it's social comparison. Lopez Guimeta's meta-analysis puts forward then the following cyclical model of mass media consumption, that it transmits ideals of beauty, which can be internalized or encouraged by social pressure, and that therefore results in body dissatisfaction, concerns with weight, and disordered eating. However, given the sensitive nature of this topic, which prevents us from doing direct experimentation, it's unethical to introduce children to a stimulus that we have good reason to believe might just result in such negative outcomes. We are left instead with a cycle instead of a linear model because we can't causally show any of this. We cannot delineate whether or not increased media consumption is a product of existing feelings of body dissatisfaction or if body dissatisfaction is a result of increased media consumption. We can't parse these from each other. And the takeaway is that we sincerely do not know the answer. We do not know which comes first. So the next time someone says that this or that media representation causes lowered self-esteem in women and it makes girls develop EDs, self-esteem issues, and body dissatisfaction, remind them that the jury of scientific evidence is still out on this one. What we do know is that these outcomes are not good, obviously. But does feeling bad about the body necessarily lead to disordered eating? Presnell and his colleagues found that women dissatisfied with their bodies were actually about the same BMI as those who weren't, and males who were dissatisfied actually tended to be closer to overweight. Tiedemann in 2005 found that BMI itself was somewhat less of a predictive power than lower self-esteem in girls over the course of 2 years of assessment of developing eating disorders. That is, it's not necessarily weight itself, but perceptions that the self is overweight, and finding that state dissatisfying that leads to body image issues and potentially ED. That means, though, that just because someone can be thin or thick, it doesn't matter. If they are dissatisfied with their body, BMI is probably less important than that personal dissatisfaction. And we've seen that dissatisfaction comes from social comparison. But what it means is that thin people can be as likely to dislike their bodies as overweight people. And although Calzo et al. 2012 did report that body dissatisfaction is highest in older girls above the 50th BMI percentile, and while it's also highest above the 75th percentile in men, the relationship is curvilinear. And this curvaceous correlation also indicates that thinner boys tend to be dissatisfied with their bodies as well. And when we look across the board at just concern with weight, it's everywhere, at least in women. Again, being most prevalent in older girls, but women of any BMI. It's based on perception and internalization, which, as we've seen, is all a product of comparing the self to others, both friends and in the media, not with the media alone and not with friends alone. Social media being what it is as a mixture, though, of friend interaction and social interaction along with media exposure, presents us with a little bit of a different question here, though, doesn't it? And considering how ubiquitous social media is, particularly for millennials and Gen Z, we need to focus specifically on how social media affects body dissatisfaction. Does looking at attractive people online, even if the answers aren't so clear in traditional media, affect body image? Once again, there's a ton of research on body image and social media involvement, so let's start with basic appearance before we move on specifically to weight. Haverkamp and Kramer 2011 showed participants a profile page that featured an attractive, or I guess unfortunate-looking individual who either had a successful career as a medical professional or a, well, let's just say a not-so-successful one.
And from them, we've built up a pretty clear picture of the sort of person that you are. And I think I can say without fear of contradiction that the ideal job for you is chartered accountancy.
But I am a chartered accountant.
Jolly good. Well, back to the office with you then.
They found people who saw more attractive profiles reported feeling fewer positive emotions and a greater discrepancy between their real body and their ideal body. In other words, looking at attractive people did make people feel worse about themselves. It wasn't so much so that looking at ugly people, in contrast, reduced that discrepancy between the ideal self and the real self, only that it was higher when looking at a pretty person. This is likely a manifestation of benign envy. Moreover, an interesting effect of self-esteem crops up again in these data, which illustrates people with high self-esteem who saw a successful profile anticipated finding a job soon after they graduated from college, while low self-esteem individuals who saw a successful profile anticipated their post-collegiate job search as being 3 times longer than those who had higher self-esteem. That is, people who have low self-esteem tend to be more affected by envy than those with higher self-esteem when it comes to viewing other people online. Again, these are pre-existing traits. Self-esteem trumps media effects. But we're just talking about prettiness there. The real issue of all of this is making comparisons between the self and others, potentially causing problems with body satisfaction when it comes to looking at thin or beautiful women, right? Specifically as it applies to body positivity and disordered eating, Tiggeman and Miller, 2010, asked about teenage girls' internet and social use in association with their weight and satisfaction, their drive for thinness, and how they compared their own bodies to others and their internalization about wanting to change something about the self, including wanting to be thin. Internet exposure in general was related to a 17% decrease in weight satisfaction, but the direct correlations were far stronger when mediated through internalization and comparison to others. That is, while internet exposure did have an effect, stronger effects were produced when those individuals internalized a desire to change the self and compared themselves strongly to others. A similar result was found in the drive for thinness. While there was a direct effect on internet exposure, in toto accounting for 32% of variance, again, the indirect correlations of internet exposure as mediated through internalization and comparison to others were more potent in their association with drive for thinness. When it comes to specific website use and these effects, Facebook was the most single influential website, followed by similar social media exposure to the now long dead MySpace. At least I'll always have you, Tom. YouTube and Google, however, had no significant effect on any of the variables. A relatively recent meta-analysis from Roger and Milioli, 2015, which examined the wealth of data on social media and internet use and body dissatisfaction and eating disorders, reveals some pretty disturbing findings, and frankly, there's too much for me to cover in detail once again, but to go over some of the basic research that specifically looks at more common social media sites, because some of these data deal with people who went and viewed pro-Anna communities. Why would someone be visiting a pro-Anna website if they didn't already have some body image issues? Anyway, across the majority of the studies on social media media and body image, almost every single time, the problem comes down to social comparison. If some women aren't particularly prone to engaging in a lot of this social comparison, the reported effects on body image and developing disordered eating habits is minimal if extant at all. I look at, for example, Kleemans et al. 2016 found that when adolescent girls saw an image of a model on Instagram whose photo had been manipulated to appear thinner, they expressed decreased body image, but only when they tended to have high social comparisons toward the model. These trends, however, are undeniable. So how are we supposed to ameliorate them? Is it to promote bodies of all sizes because it will make women feel better about themselves? I mean, actually, yeah, it seems like that might be the case, but probably not for the reasons that fat activists like to put forward, because it's not so much about loving all bodies at all sizes, but about making downward social comparisons as to feel better about yourself in comparison to others. I may be a moon-faced puppet-looking sped, but at least I don't look like the woman in the Gillette ad, right? That's a downward social comparison. And I'm not saying that to be mean, I'm saying it because that's the point, and we can see it in the data from Fox and Vadimia 2016, who examined men and women's photo posting and editing on social media and their reactions to social comparison. Men and women tended to actually post around the same number of photos, but women tended to edit their photos more. But what's really important here is that women felt much better about themselves when they made downward social comparisons to the images and bodies of other women, and felt worse about themselves when they made upward social comparisons. In other words, they felt better about themselves when they got to make fun of the fatty. If your goal is to make women love all their bodies, is it really the best option then than to try and ensure that there are no beautiful women that others could make upward comparisons to? So instead, they just feel better about themselves via thinking that others are uglier than them. Is it really not enough that I should succeed? Others should also fail? Is that what you're proposing? Does that sound like a very healthy idea to you at any size? You know what might be a little bit healthier? Being nice to other people on the internet. As we can see from Wang and Wang et al. 2018, who found that when women posted selfies online, there was no direct effect on posting on decreased self-esteem, but instead, there was an increase in self-esteem when women received positive feedback on their photos, when they were told they were pretty, both directly and indirectly, as positive feedback was correlated to increased body satisfaction.
Next thing you know, it's #ThightHursday. Thirsty guys follow them by the hundreds, and they've got pick of the litter.
I would suggest instead we look to Tamplin, McLean, and Paxton 2018, who found that women, but not men, who were exposed to social media images of idealized bodies actually felt better about their own body image when they were high in media literacy. Media literacy means that they understood that social media messages are not natural, but are crafted. A nearly identical result was found in Vadimia and Deandra 2018, who showed women images of Instagram models and found that when they were aware that the photos had been edited, they expressed decreased thin ideal internalization, they were more interested in posting their own photos for their own purposes, and less concerned with the opinions and perceptions of others. Additionally, they just didn't like the Insta-thought when they thought she'd edited her photos.
It's not my fault you're like in love with me or something. What?
Oh no, she did not.
See, that is the thing with you plastics. You think that everybody is in love with you when actually everybody hates you.
Why not try to increase media literacy then? Why not encourage people to be nice rather than saying things can't exist on the internet because it might offend somebody? Why not make people more aware that Instagram models are essentially creating a brand of beauty and they do not represent reality? Plenty of YouTubers have talked about this issue before. I'm not the first one by far. From Nerd City to H3H3, they've all exposed to their significant audiences just how farcical things like Instagram models are. I mean, there's an Instagram model that is actually a computer model, a completely computer-generated person, and plenty of people still follow that account unwittingly. And the degree to which media exposure has on body image and dissatisfaction are, as we have seen, usually pretty small, and almost always more well explained via social comparison and existing self-esteem, BMI, and perceptions of the body, rather than media, which only exacerbates it, particularly for those of lower positions of social power or influence who tend to be lonely and envious and engage in a lot of these social comparisons. So knowing all of this, I would argue that with just a little bit of media literacy, and by knowing yourself enough to know that if you are highly prone to envy, or if you engage in a lot of passive social network use, then if you cannot become more media literate, then just, in the words of Tyler the Creator, close your eyes. Bruh. Seriously, we've seen this. When people leave social networks, when they spend more time with their friends, they tend to feel better, and the negative potential effects are mitigated. If going on Twitter and seeing that Macy's is selling plates with quirky portion control suggestions on them is so triggering to you that you have to pull them from shelves because it is affecting your life satisfaction,
It's time to stop!
Turn off your computer, turn off your phone. But they won't. We've seen that they won't. And it's not just because it's addicting, but because it's actually not about body satisfaction at this point. It is still all about social comparison. But now that comparison is less related to physicality and appearance and more about status. And we can see this in Chai 2017, who assessed South Korean women and their reactions to exposure to social media influencers and their envy towards other women online. Life satisfaction and self-esteem were both related to increased online envy, but also indirectly through social comparison. Women who use more social media tend to prefer daily life-related content, the sort of blogging stuff you see online, and were subconsciously likely to compare themselves to influencers. And when they compared themselves to influencers, they were more envious of those influencers when they posted particularly about their wealth and luxury of lifestyle. Status is not just about appearance, but it's also about clout. And who has more clout than those with the social capital to have anyone they disagree with removed from a social media platform? Who really has the power here in the case of Jessica Yaniv and Lindsay Shepherd? Is it Shepherd for calling Yaniv fat after he incessantly, and I'm being disrespectful by the way, because I'm not going to be respectful to this skeevy gremlin of a person, mocked her for having a septated uterus? Or is it Yaniv for being able to have Lindsay Shepherd promptly banned from Twitter because after many aggressive tweets, she called him fat? Who has the real social capital here? And who are we actually making upward social comparisons to in social media if we are in relatively low power positions? Is it the beautiful or is it the socially powerful? And to assess that, we have to look at social capital. Historically, social media has been viewed as an extension of our typical personal social networks, and as such, related to increased social capital. Social capital is a concept that describes how people use relationships and ties with one another to increase emotional support and to gain greater access to resources. Those with more social capital are more able to influence others and possess a greater reach. For example, someone with a lot of social capital can essentially rally the troops, such as the term implies, to help defend them when they have been accused of misconduct, as can be seen quite evidently from the massive outpouring of money and support for voice actor Vic Mignogna after allegations of sexual assault began being lobbed at him in early 2019. Mignogna's network and the many people who have come out in support of his case against Funimation and his alleged defamers illustrate this. The capacity for Vic and those who defend him to raise over $230,000 for his legal fees is a very real manifestation of how one can levy social capital into real capital by pooling the resources of many within a social group. Skriniewski, Benig, and Brettel 2017 found a spillover effect of social capital specifically as it applies to crowdfunding campaign success. That is, the more Facebook friends, the more shares, the more spread across other websites, all predicted that a fundraiser would meet its goals, which is precisely what we see with Vic Mignogna. But crowdfunding is a very specific example. So how does the average person use social capital online? Researchers have been studying this for a while. For example, Ellison, Steinfeld, and Lamp, 2007, in an early analysis examined 3 types of social capital, including bridging social capital, which creates wider networks rife for reciprocity, the kind of thing that involves both identification. In the case of Vic, we can look at Kick Vic being an identity, or I Stand With Vic being an identity, and many people coming together to pool their resources in support of those within their social network. They found that existing satisfaction with life and having high self-esteem, in addition to heavy Facebook use, was related to higher social capital. A replication of this research more recently from Kendon Abile 2018 reports similar findings, but included things that we've learned since then about social media use, namely about passive browsing and social comparison, which we've seen plays a role in things like self-esteem, depression, and envy. They found that again, the intensity of Facebook use was strongly related to bridging social capital, but that passive Facebook use was negatively related to bonding social capital. In other words, people who use social media the most tend to have the most social capital, and social capital is an envious trait. Further, a meta-analysis from Liu, Ainsworth, and Baumeister 2016 similarly finds that for both bonding and bridging social capital, offline friends were an important factor in the model in addition to self-disclosure and personality maintenance. That is, you cannot live entirely on the internet, and if it's consuming your life, it's time to stop. Not all of us possess the same degrees of social capital, and Chang et al. 2019 proposed a rich get richer model of social capital and social media in a massive meta-analysis. They found that personality traits played an important role in how people use social media and whether or not they're likely to gain more social capital via its use. They found that heavy users are often lonely and possess a lot of social anxiety, but at the same time, other heavy users also tend to be very high in extroversion. Yet unlike those low in extroversion, these high extroversion people are likely to gain more social capital during their time online, and thus perhaps are happier both because they use social media to gain more social benefits, and because, well, they probably aren't making a lot of social comparisons. In contrast, those who are low in extroversion, high in anxiety, they tend to become only more lonely. Aaron Potziberger and Novik 2016 found no direct negative effect of Facebook use on happiness, and found that people who possessed greater amounts of higher quality social capital were happier than those who did not possess the social capital while using social networks. People who had less social capital, both in quantity and in quality, tend to be lonelier online and subsequently less happy. They found that when accounting for social capital, using social networks does not negatively impact those with a strong support system both online and off, while it does negatively impact the happiness in the lonely with no social support and with low social capital. While we've seen plenty of evidence that social media use can cause plenty of negative outcomes, when we consider social capital and social comparison, a very different picture can be painted, one which shows numerous positive effects on users. For example, Nabi, Preston, and So 2013 found that the more Facebook friends one had, the happier they were, to a small degree, but more importantly, the greater they perceived their social capital. As a result, this increased social support of more people, more friends, results in less stress and actually less physical illness. Being popular online actually makes you healthier to a degree. Again, people with a lot of followers are seemingly unaffected by the problems of upward social comparison and passive browsing that produces situations wherein people become addicted to social media, even though they may already possess lowered self-esteem or high anxiety, which is only exacerbated over their period of time of use. While those who are extroverted may have many friends and are clearly enjoying their time online, and thus themselves become more enviable by the people who are making these upward social comparisons. For this reason, people will sometimes just sit and stew in their envy, and we've seen that they don't get burned out, and other times they will try to mimic the success of the enviable, such as found in Chai 2017, who found that women who took more selfies and used more social media tended to make more comparisons, both between their friends and between social media celebrities, those with the highest of social capital online. And they found that over the course of a month, women who made more social comparisons were more likely to begin editing their photos and their selfies to portray themselves as more physically attractive. Everyone online is putting their best face forward. This was seminally examined by Walther in 1996 in his hyperpersonal model of computer-mediated communication. So, all the way back to when we used to call internet research CMC. An oldie, but a goodie and a favorite theory of mine.
How do you get on the internet?
I don't. I don't do like the emails.
The emails? It's email. It's just email. Who doesn't have the internet in this day and age?
What the hyperpersonal model proposes is that the relative anonymity of the internet allows us to selectively present the best aspects of ourselves. The problem is that if everybody is doing that, and everyone is presenting the idealized version of themselves, then no one online is really being real. And we tend to view others more positively precisely because we only get to see that idealized, curated version of the self. This causes us to form relationships that are both very emotionally powerful and form them very quickly online, because everyone just seems like such a cool guy.
I just hope that there's some woman or women out there who really like having their clicked. That's all I really.
That's a cool guy. That is a cool guy.
The more social capital one has, the more reason we have to think that this person is a cool guy, and we're left feeling self-conscious about ourselves because we know that we're putting our best face forward, which is not representative of the true self. So let me ask you, who has the most to gain by putting on a certain positive face? A certain positive face that they know will be well received and met with lots and lots of delicious social capital. Could it be fat activists who seem to have very little problem body shaming thin women, yet get massive mainstream media support for destroying the patriarchal system that's causing all these young girls to develop problems with self-esteem and depression and eating disorders, which again, we've seen there is no direct evidence of. It is not in any way a direct result of simply media exposure. Who has the most to gain here? Who gets the most social capital out of this? And you don't have to take my word for it, because we can see the intersection of social capital on physical attractiveness and body dissatisfaction in Tiegemann et al. 2018, in that images of attractive thin women with more likes on Instagram actually decreased perceptions of body dissatisfaction and facial dissatisfaction in women who viewed these images. That's right. Specifically, when someone is beautiful and thin, it does not inherently produce body image issues when that person is also seen as popular. A similar result was forwarded in average-sized Instagram models, as those with high likes reduced perceptions of facial dissatisfaction in participants. Women felt better about their own faces when they saw an average-looking woman with a lot of likes. Feeling bad about one's own body and face was more prevalent when seeing photos of thin women in general, that's true. But as likes increased, that is a measure of social capital increased, so decreased perceptions of negative body image. The social capital became more important than the body image. If you are someone with low social capital, you have few friends online, you're typically more of an introvert, maybe you've got a lot of social anxiety, maybe you've got some existing self-esteem issues and depression, and you're passively watching others reap the online benefits of their social capital, be it for their beauty or their status, and you want to gain social capital? Let me ask you, what sounds like an easier and more logical route to take to increase your own capital? Do you put a ton of time and effort into creating a brand like Belle Delphine has? Regardless of what you think of her and her gamer girl water, she's definitively a brand. And that brand is a product of a lot of effort in building social capital through her fan base. And for review, you can see Gandini 2016. But you know, work's like hard and stuff, so why work?
I don't really wanna do the work today. I don't really wanna do the work today. I don't wanna do the work today.
What if I told you that you could become internet famous, you could gain a ton of social capital if you become an outspoken fat activist by trash-talking someone like Belle Delphine? You get to make downward social comparisons, which make you feel better about yourself and improve your own ego. You get to gain all that delicious social capital and clout and get backpats for your wokeness and tons of positive comments that only further inflate your own self-esteem, as we've seen. If anything, people probably have too much self-esteem on the internet as a result of the current zeitgeist. You can become a social media sensation overnight if you complain enough about the right things, and frankly, people maybe not so much like myself, but within this sphere on YouTube who respond to these kinds of people and their statements, only feed into the cycle of increasing the social capital and boosting the self-esteem via positive comments made in response to the response. None of this is about body positivity. It's about gaining social capital. Who is truly enviable on the social media space at this point? Is it beautiful people, or is it people with positions of power that they can gain by trash-talking beautiful people?
Go ahead, rate me. I don't give a shit. I'll rate you. 0, 0, 0, rate!
Okay, sir.
Rate!
Sir, you need to leave,
Rate!
okay? You need to leave, okay?
0, 0, I will rate every single woman in this restaurant!
Please?
Whichever one it is, it's certainly not the average person who does feel depressed and upset because they don't have any kind of clout or social capital online, and they're left to make upward social comparisons. And that doesn't have to be an upward social comparison via physicality, it can be an upward social comparison via status, as we have seen. So, with that all in mind, let's come to some conclusions. Based on everything we've seen today, and based on the wealth of research, there is no clear direct causal relationship between media exposure and body dissatisfaction. It is related, but it's not directly causal, at least not so far as anyone can prove. What instead seems to be the case is that this reaction is highly individualized, in that personality differences including base self-esteem, depression, anxiety, tendency towards envy, and tendency towards social comparison all supersede any capacity for the media to really influence body dissatisfaction by itself. Instead, it is social comparison, it is envy that creates this seeming increase in dissatisfaction, as those who do not overly socially compare themselves seem to be mostly immune to it. Further, the proposals of fat activists and body-positive proponents do not seem to have any real capacity to mitigate this effect. At best, it only increases downward social comparison and those who are already prone to social comparison. That is, to feel better about the self by looking down at other people who are less attractive than you and feeling better as a result. Is it actually just to bolster your own self-esteem, fat activists, body-positive proponents, to gain social capital for yourself, and therefore to gain power within social media and the media sphere in general? Well, I would argue it's the latter. If fat activists truly wanted women to love their bodies at any size, they would not encourage downward social comparison, as all this does is increase personal self-esteem and personal body image by feeling superior to others, which will ultimately result in a cycle of more and more of the same. And let's be honest, more and more crap like this Gillette ad. This ad only makes other women feel better about themselves by denigrating the woman in it. Instead, social media literacy, being nice to people online, seem to be far more beneficial in mitigating any potential negative effects of social media exposure. Further, we've seen that social capital trumps physical appearance when it comes to social media. Showing off your status is far more important than showing off your beauty. Do you notice how many Instagram models are also showing themselves off in expensive, extravagant locations in addition to their bodies? That's for a reason. It's social capital. And Instagram models have as much social capital as people who get put on the front page of mainstream news websites because they bitched about body image online. What this means is that those with the most social power actually have more control over body image than those who are just inherently beautiful and thin, but also less popular in the online space. Articles like this one about ending Western civilization in the name of fat acceptance only give more social capital to Instagram therapists and the like. And the more likes they get, which they do when they are given a spotlight by the mainstream media, is more potent than being beautiful in many instances online. Truly, the desired body is not a physical one alone when it comes to online interaction, but rather a reflection of the body politic. The extent of influence one exerts that makes him or her more desirable and possibly even enviable comes down to social capital. The current enviable class, therefore, is not the beautiful and thin alone, although they certainly are to a degree, but also those who wield the power of social capital, those who can set trends, those who can frame the media narrative. And they can all do so while espousing the evils of having seen an image of a thin woman on the internet.
Oh no, finish your tweet. That's fine. Just give us a second. There you go. Hashtag it. Go get her, Tiger.
Is there a problem with media representation and female body image? Probably, to a degree. But as we've seen, we have to put it all into context. Almost never in the social sciences are things so directly one-to-one causally related, and it makes me frustrated that I have to constantly say things like this. Because the people who espouse this, who gain social capital by espousing it, do not want you to look at the science. They don't want you to look at the data and realize things are not so clear-cut and black and white as they would like to paint them to be. No, data are complicated. And when we specifically address individual differences and social comparison across groups and different people, it produces these effects across the population. We can understand wherefore this comes, these negative effects and negative reactions to social media, if we account for individual differences, traits, and tendencies. This does not occur in isolate, nor does it occur outside of these individual differences. As I said earlier, if an image of Macy's plates makes you go absolutely mad, then maybe you need to just check out of the internet, unless you know that your own madness will gain you social clout, which it does. And it's exactly why they do this. It is not because they are concerned about the body image issues of young girls. It's because they know they can use it to gain their own social capital. These are the kind of people who sit around being envious of others online, who make constant social comparisons, and they want everyone else to do it along with them, to make themselves better so they can make downward social comparisons towards the pretty people who just don't have the same influence. Thus, I must conclude that despite the fact that there are some real issues here that may be underlying in terms of media exposure, the proposals of fat activists and the body positive movement to remove all images of thin, attractive women or any mention of health or fitness online will do nothing to reduce the problems of self-esteem, loneliness, and envy that we see social media elicit. Because the same people who engage in upward social comparison and experience those deleterious psychological effects will feel them the same way when they compare themselves to others in other high-status positions, or when they themselves become in a position of higher status, where now they're just going to be making downward social comparisons. You're still comparing yourself to everyone else, and you're still feeling envious. And again, who has the social capital here when a fat trans activist can get a woman banned from Twitter after sending numerous tweets mocking her body? Who has the power there? What do you guys think? Do you think social media negatively affects the psyche and mental health of our society? Is there any point to body positivity? And if so, do the suggestions of its proponents seemingly make any sense? Is social capital in the form of being woke and promoted by the mainstream media more potent online in terms of social comparison than simply being pretty? I've just presented you with the data, but let me know what you think in the comments below. I always love to hear from you guys. As always, a massive thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, Subscribestar, and Streamlabs. Thank you guys so much. You guys truly allow this type of very spurgy video to be made. I'll have some links down in the description for some books from Amazon if you're interested in picking them up if you want to learn more about this topic. Less this time than normal because this was very journal focused, but I'll see what I can do. Additionally, if you guys want to see me in real life for whatever reason, in just a few weeks now, I will be attending the International Conference on Men's Issues in Chicago and Minds IRL in Philadelphia. Please check out the descriptions for tickets if there's any left. You heard my shilling earlier, but if you're interested, you can get 75% off a 3-year subscription to NordVPN by using the link in my description. And finally, if you want more of my pedantry for some reason, I do play Pathfinder every Tuesday on Nuckalavee's channel, linked below and in a card above. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, consider liking it, subscribing, hitting the bell, and as always, friends, Altana Volt.